The topic of tonight is, what are UFOs? That's at least the name of the topic. We will also be talking about, in more general terms, the paranormal. So the correct, really the proper, perhaps a better name for the lecture is, what is the Jewish view or position on that which is classified as the paranormal? Does everybody here understand what the word paranormal means? That which is not physical, that which cannot be explained through physics. And we'll talk a little bit about many of the incredible incidents that are paranormal, that exist in this world, that have been observed, and what are they really? So I just want to give a few small introduction as to what paranormal is and so forth. Throughout the ages, throughout history, mankind has been aware all along that there is something called paranormal, that some things cannot be explained regularly. Not everybody understood what it is, but they definitely understood more than what we understand today. There is an area called parapsychology. Parapsychology is more specific in dealing with that which is paranormal concerning the human mind. For example, you may have heard of the ability called ESP, extrasensory perception, or telepathy, where people can see things or know things or communicate without any exchange of words. Now just imagine for a moment that you were living 150 years ago, okay, during, Martin Van Buren's presidency. Most of you do not know. President number 8 of this country. And you told someone, your friend, your neighbor, you know what? I'm going to take a piece of metal and punch some buttons and talk to somebody in Israel right now. Would anybody believe him? What? To talk? There was no regular phone. Cellular phone? Bichlal. He would think you're crazy. That would be magic, if anything. Today we're so used to it that voice travels in waves, waves can be transmitted, images can be transmitted. And just 15 years ago, to be able to transmit images through modems, even though modems existed, people were not very much aware of these capabilities. And today just people take it for granted. You can actually not only talk, but you can see somebody on the other side of the world through a video camera. So because we got used to it, we take things for granted. In those days, they also were aware of certain things that existed that for us may be very unusual today, because simply we're not used to it. So it depends on whether one is used to it or not. Parapsychology, therefore, is a very fascinating science, if we can call it science, that deals with certain abilities that human beings have that they may not be aware of. And it's true. Some of it has been proven. It makes some sense. It is found in Judaic sources. So we don't have a problem with it. It is possible to somewhat prove that these abilities exist. Then there's something a little bit more controversial, which has to do with psychokinetic activities, which deal with influencing matter or energy without actually moving it. You may have heard or seen somebody bend a spoon.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And there are all sorts of individuals out there, all types, that have done many, many incredible things. Some are true, some are tricks. And that's a whole different story on how one can tell if it's a trick or not. There's a way to tell. But it is possible. It is possible to do certain things like that, using concentration of the mind, using what they call psychokinetic abilities to perform these things. Science in itself does not want to accept any of this, because science basically says, I will only accept that which can be proven in a laboratory. In other words, that which can be established to certain rules and guidelines, I will accept. If not, then I won't accept it. Now, an honest individual, an honest scientist will at least say, listen, I do not believe it, I'm not sure. You have to prove it to me. You have to convince me. Just like an agnostic would say, I'm not an atheist, Haz v'shalom, that I do not believe at all. I just need to be convinced. I wish most people belonged to that camp. I wish people actually believed completely in the faith. But if someone were to say, convince me, I want to believe, that is much better than somebody who says, no, I've already made up my mind. These things don't exist. And unfortunately, you have a lot of scientists and non-scientists who have already made up their mind. And when somebody has already made up their mind, it's very difficult to convince them. No matter what you say, no matter what you bring and what you show, they're always going to try to say, oh, this is something else. This is not satisfactory. So science has a problem. Then we have the skeptic. What is skepticism? Doubting. Is that okay? It's healthy and it's unhealthy. To be a skeptic is okay, but it's also not okay, because if, again, you want to be convinced, you're just unsure, then that's fine. Why is it okay to be a skeptic? Because there are crooks out there, there are cheaters, there are liars, there are magicians, there are people who perform all sorts of tricks. Illusionists. That's what magicians are all about. Is they, make you believe that you're seeing something, but it's totally untrue. And why is that important for us to know? Because you have to be careful. It depends what they're trying to sell you. If they're trying to sell you a religion based on the trick, then obviously you have to be very careful with that. It could be something else. And we'll get to that a little bit later, what else it could be. But you want to filter out those that are simply trying to convince you of a sham. Is that what it's called? Where it's totally unfounded, untrue. But to be only a skeptic and not to allow yourself to have an open mind that certain things exist, you're blocking yourself to discover that which is incredible. In other words, there's a lot of things in this world that are really incredible that we could not imagine that they exist, unless, of course, we come across them, unless we study them. And if we close our minds that these things do not exist or they cannot be true in any way or form, then obviously we're losing out. Because as I will point out in the lecture, some of these things that exist can be very helpful to strengthen one's faith in God. In other words, as long as one allows himself a little bit of room, and he comes across them, observes them, or has a friend who he trusts that has experienced it, that he could help him convince himself that perhaps there is life after death, as an example. And this is a very important example, because imagine somebody that just lost somebody very, very dear to them at a very young age. And it's very difficult, to comfort someone, because you can't bring them back, so what are you going to say? So when somebody has a total lack of faith in the life after death, and they think that the person is really gone, they're not only going to be heartbroken, whatever you say won't make too much of a difference to them. So if somehow that person can be convinced, no, there is life after death, there's something called the neshama, the neshama survives, that can make a big difference in the way people see life, in the way people experience a loss in their life. So it would be really nice if all these mysteries or paranormal activities can be proven beyond any doubt. It would be really nice. But Hashem does not want to. And the reason for that is, I explained in a couple lectures ago, is for the same reason that miracles are not too apparent and are not too frequent, because it would interfere with our free will. And because Hashem does not want us does not want things to be too obvious so that people can exercise true free will. He does not make things too clear. He allows man to decide for himself what this could be. If it would be too clear and too obvious, then obviously he would make up his mind, and then we would not have the true free will to make a decision, or whether to follow his word, to do the mitzvah or not to do. Things would be obvious. One would get punished right away on the spot, then things would be obvious to him. But if it appears like the wicked are getting away with it, and those who are righteous are suffering, then perhaps somebody would reconsider, why should I be religious? I don't see them having a better life than those who are committing all the evil in this world. So there needs to be a little bit of room for doubt, for skepticism, but you have to be careful to have an open mind. What we've done till now is we've spoken about the neshama, the nefesh, the ruach, the various parts of the human body that are not physical. And that was an introduction, in a sense, to what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks. We need to begin with an assumption that God created the world, that God supervises the world, that there is something called the neshama. I try to do this in that particular order, because if one does not believe in all of that, then he's going to have a hard time understanding the next very important topic a couple weeks from now. What is a soulmate? In a couple weeks from now, we're going to be talking for 3-4 weeks about an incredible important topic that has to do with neshamot, with souls too, that which is unseen. Nonetheless, it is part of our tradition that there is something called a soulmate, and it even appears in other cultures, in other religions. The term soulmate. Well, what is a soul? There is something other than the body called the neshama. I don't see it. So we've spoken about it, that it exists, but we haven't proven it. All I've done is discuss a phenomena called OBE and NDE, out-of-body experience and near-death experience, that somehow bring to light that there is something other than the physical body. Because if somebody sees himself floating above his body, then what is that supposed to mean? He's not dreaming. He may have been involved in an accident where he saw the paramedics rushing, where he remembers what the doctors were talking behind his back while he was supposedly in a coma. What is that supposed to be? Right? So for those of you who weren't here, this is a quick review. An NDE, or a near-death experience, does prove something. And there's a lot of non-Jewish authors, researchers, and many books on this topic. But you'll still have the scientists who'll say, oh no, it's part of the imagination. But everybody has seen exactly the same thing when they've left their body and they've gone through a tunnel. How do you explain that? Of course, the skeptics who try to debunk the theory, no, it's not a theory, who try to debunk this whole idea, have an agenda. If this is true, this would destroy everything that they believe in. So obviously they cannot accept, and they don't want to be open-minded to this. But NDE and OBE, or out-of-body experience, does in some ways prove that there's something other than the physical body, and that there is life after death, or at least the neshama continues to exist after the body is buried. There is other proof, and that will be another topic a couple weeks from now when we talk about reincarnation. Gilgul Neshamot. Reincarnation? For some Jews, that sounds like Hinduism. You mean Judaism believes in reincarnation? I thought that was Hinduism. Well, what do you think they took it from? The reason why a lot of Jews are not aware of it has a little bit to do with the fact that it was not known amongst Jews, the general population, until the Zohar came out. It was the mystical part of Judaism. The Kabbalah. The Kabbalah was not published, was not around forever. I mean, it was around, but it was only the few that knew the secrets of the Kabbalah. Once reincarnation became something more known and accepted in Jewish circles, a lot of questions were answered. Many things were better understood, why certain things happened to certain people. And that is, of course, a separate topic which we'll be discussing a couple of weeks from now. But it also shows, it proves that there's something other than the physical body called the neshama. And we'll be talking about another very interesting topic called seances. Does everybody here know what a seance is? A seance is prohibited. The Torah prohibits us from communicating with the dead through Ouija boards, through mediums. There are various ways that people can communicate with those who have departed. And I'm not going to give you instructions tonight how to do it, because it's a surah. It's prohibited. And when we talk about it, I'll tell you what could happen to the person who's involved. It's not a good idea to do so. But many have done it, especially, unfortunately, in Israel. Sometimes the soldiers are bored. So in their tent they get together and do a seance. Let's call the soul of our friend who was killed a week ago and see how he's doing. Yeah. Now, I have to admit that many of them have become Balei Teshuvah because of that. It has helped them, but that's not the way to become a Baal Teshuvah. It could be dangerous too. And for those of you who are interested, we have a video, seances in the army. I don't recall if we translated it. I think we did. I'm not sure. There's two of them, one audio and one video, about some soldiers who were involved and who became Balei Teshuvah and what they went through, how they almost lost their life because of that. Anyway, if one really wants to find out if there's something called the soul, if the soul survives, if there is life after death, there are various ways that he can discover it. We're talking about something very spiritual in nature, right? The soul. In our daily life, even though we're not aware completely of the soul, it becomes apparent to us that there are certain spiritual forces around us that we can't really explain. And I'll give you just one example. Since I mentioned soulmates, what comes to mind, speaking about soulmates, is the law of attraction. Now, most of us are familiar with physical attraction between a male and a female. Baruch Hashem that Hashem made this, whether it's man and woman or whether it's animals, because that's what leads to reproduction. Hashem made that law of attraction so that they should get married and reproduce. But then there is also the law of attraction that has nothing to do with necessarily male-female, but it has to do with two people feeling very good in each other's company. You can call it chemistry, you can call it affinity, you can call it the synastry of the two people. There's different names for it. And when I spoke about astrology, I discussed it a little bit, how certain people from certain months of the year that have a certain element, or whether fire, water, air, or earth, are attracted to each other, like magnets. Just like magnets, right, attract. So there are certain people who are attracted and they cannot explain it. There have been cute stories of how this intelligent guy who has a PhD was best friends with a farmer, with an ignoramus, with the student in class who always failed. Why would the top of the class, the best student, want to be best friend with the one who always fails? They have nothing in common. Their backgrounds are different. One is intellectual, one is smart, one is successful, and the other one has no mazal, is perhaps even a little bit lazy, is not successful. Why should there be any friendship there? But for those of you who know what true friendship is, true friendship does not distinguish between race, color, background. The friendship is there. It's like glue. It sticks well. How do you explain it? It's something spiritual. And the rabbis tell us that this koach ha-meshicha, that this law of attraction exists because of the months of the year, the mazalot. It exists because people have similar names. David and David, Yitzhak and Yitzhak, Eliyahu and Eliyahu. These names have a certain affinity, maybe not as much as the mazal, but there's something there. And there's something called shoresh haneshama. People from the same root of the soul. People who are from the same root of the soul, they won't know why they're interested in each other, but they will be interested in each other. Somehow they will be glued. They will have an interest in each other. So we don't understand how it works, but we do know that this is spiritual in nature because there's no physical explanation for it. Just wanted to give you a few more examples of that which is spiritual, of that which some would call paranormal, that they don't have explanation for. Another example of where one sees something paranormal or perhaps spiritual is the fact that there are those who can read the lines in the hand. The palm, the left hand and the right hand, contain lines, sirtutim. And these lines are not there by accident, because even a baby has them, and he was not playing around making marks. The same lines that you will see in a baby's hand when he's born, when he comes to the mother, that's the same lines pretty much that he will have until you bury him on the ground after 120 years. The exact same lines, clear. Sometimes there's some changes occur. And it's through these lines, as it says in Iyov, Biyat kol adam yachtom bo ladat kol ish ma'aseu, that one can know the future or the nature of the individual by observing the lines, for those who know how to read them, and know a lot about the person. Through what knowledge? How could this be? Obviously, the one who created man created his lines too. They're not just formed there by accident. So this is again another way of seeing that there is some hashgacha, there's some divine providence, there's some control, there's some system here other than physical rules, that through these rules you can actually predict the future. I mean, even though the weather is something that is predictable, but that is not a future event per se. That is basically the laws of nature, that based on what satellites are showing, there's an approaching storm. That's a little bit of a prediction. But to predict what will happen to a baby when he's 55 years old, that is, of course, takes some greater knowledge. Okay? Another example is Chokhmata Partsuf. Chokhmata Partsuf is the knowledge that some have had on being able to look at a person's face and forehead and be able to detect certain illnesses, or according to the Kabbalah, certain sins. All of this, again, additional proof that there is some knowledge out there that is aware of certain things that cannot be explained in physical terms. Now, let's assume that somebody wants to prove this. Okay? He knows a little bit of this, and he reads your hand, and he makes a mistake. And you tell him that's not true. Okay? What are you going to conclude from this experience that you've had with this individual that just read your hand and made a mistake? Some may conclude that this is baloney. Anybody else want to suggest what he would conclude from this?
I want to say that in Israel, I know somebody in Israel,
Right.
that's an expert reading hands. Not only he, but his father.
Right, I know. But let's say that he made a mistake. Okay? This expert made a mistake, a real blatant mistake. What are you going to conclude from that? Yeah.
I've seen one India
Right?
in some other country,
Right?
you just read, they have everything, and everything is true.
Right. Okay, good. Yeah, I know. Of course, there are people, yeah, but let's assume that here we're going to, on television, right? We want to prove this. So the skeptic says, read my hand. The skeptic, right? And let's say the greatest expert makes a mistake and says, no, this is totally not true. It's a real mistake. What are you going to conclude?
Maybe he's not a real expert.
What is that?
No,
I'm sorry?
you don't need to. You don't want to know.
Is it going to be changed when he says this?
See, the real skeptic or the scientist is going to say, you see? Like you said, it's baloney. What is an open-minded person going to say? Wait a minute. Just because he made a mistake, why blame the science? Blame him. Maybe he does not know as much. Maybe he's not such an expert after all. Maybe there are some things he's unaware of in the hand that he was not taught. Who is to say that everything that is documented, written, is untrue? Yes?
Well, do you make an assumption that handwriting has any validity at all?
We don't make that assumption. We know that for a fact.
You know what?
It is part of our tradition.
A hand reading has...
Sure. Of course, that's part of our tradition. But for those who are not familiar with the tradition, they actually may question this. That is why I'm here tonight, right? To tell you that this is Jewish, that this is quite normal, that it's acceptable, as long as they're not gypsies or want to take your money. Right? That you have that too in this world. That's part of the problem.
Are we allowed to find out?
Another time I'll talk about that. Yes.
Source that...
The Zohar talks about it in length.
Zohar?
Yeah. And there are many books that in our tradition that discusses in length. Not all the details are there because a lot of this has to be mastered. A lot of this has to be given over from teacher to student, experienced. Yes, this is not an easy science, and I'll tell you right now, it is not easy, and that is why few people know it well. So it's easy to make a mistake. There are certain things that are subject to interpretation. I'll give an example. You may have heard about a short lifeline. I'm not going to tell you which one is a lifeline right now, but let's say somebody sees a short lifeline. A short lifeline does not necessarily mean that the person is going to have a short life. A short lifeline could mean that his activity, his most active part of his life, goes until a certain age. It doesn't mean that he dies after that point. So you really have to be careful in not telling the person, oh, you're only going to live to 41. You have to corroborate it, you have to see other signs. It's a whole thing. So if somebody is unexperienced, he can make a real terrible mistake. Oh, you're going to get divorced. Who says it's a divorce? It could be something completely different. But some lines are so small that if you don't really know what you're talking about, you have to be careful what to say. So anyway, reading of the hands is in some ways like astrology. There's the part that deals with futuristic events, and there's the part that deals with human nature. The human nature is could be very valuable, because if you want to hire an employee and you see the sign, you see that he's a crook, right? Then you don't want to hire him, right? If you see he's dishonest, you don't want to hire. How are you going to know that? There are some who use graphology. Graphology is a psychological way of using handwriting to figure out through the style of handwriting what kind of a person he is. In other words, what are his major traits? It's not perfect, but some say that it has come in very handy. But anyway, I just wanted to give you a few examples of knowledge that is really more paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to call it, because it deals with future, it deals with things that no one could really know if it was pure physical in nature. There's something more than the physical. There's something more than just the physical body. There's a neshama. Another example, which we'll be talking separately about, is a dream. What is a real dream? What about a dream where one sees his parent that passed away? What about if he tells him, oh, by the way, I know you need the money desperately. I left some for you underneath that tree. You know, that's something that you can actually verify. So you can't say, oh, it's just a dream. Right? We'll be talking about that when we talk about dreams. But that's another way where you could see that there is a neshama, that there's something spiritual out there other than the physical body. Prophecy, we'll be talking about that. What is prophecy? God's communication with us. Ruach HaKodesh. In other words, where one has, how do you translate it in English? Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. Divine inspiration to know certain things. And then another topic will be about Ain Hara. What's the evil eye? You mean to say that some people by looking at me can hurt me? Yes. There are some people that can hurt you by looking at you, and you don't want to look at them. You want to avoid them. That's called Ain Hara, the evil eye. And then there is Kishuf, witchcraft. Witchcraft, what's that? Okay, why did Hashem allow this power to exist? Witches, we'll be talking about that too soon. In order to to be able to fully grasp that there is in fact all these kohot out there, I separated the topics so that you should understand that there are certain kohot, certain powers out there that exist that Hashem created for a reason, and we'll get to them separately. And one last example that is fascinating example that has only been demonstrated in the past generation are codes in the Torah. You may have heard about this topic, that they've discovered something that we've always known but could not prove because we did not have computers, that there are codes embedded in the Torah about future events. We may not be able to ever figure out what all the codes are and which code is a real code and which one is just a random code. That's true. It may not always be possible for us to know which ones are real, which ones are not. Nevertheless, statistically, some of the codes are so incredible that they prove that the Torah is authentic, that it is the Word of God, that only somebody like God could have written the Torah and embedded all the information for future generations. Again, another example of some supernatural forces at work.
Even the Sefer Yeshayahu, we find 200 years before it happened, he already named in the Tanakh the name of the third king.
Yeah.
But it's amazing, 200 years before.
Right. Anyway, what is a Jew supposed to do when he comes across all these powers and all these paranormal events? He does not get excited. Why doesn't he get excited? Because he's aware that they exist. He only has one obligation. He needs to find out what the source of it is. Is it from the Kedusha or from the Tumah? That's all his obligation is. When a Jew is confronted with something that is paranormal, he says, yes, it is possible. My job right now is to figure out, is this from a holy or an unholy source? That's all. Because if this is from an unholy source, I want to have nothing to do with it. If it is from a holy source, then of course I will pursue it. I will look into it. I will accept it. I will listen to the person. A prophet had to prove himself, for example, that he was a real prophet. And what if somebody walked on water and tells you, you know what? There's a New Testament. I'll prove it to you that God spoke to me last night. I can walk on water. What are you going to do? You're going to accept that? Is walking on water? Is walking on water something that you have to be impressed? No. The Torah warns us that there are going to be false prophets. The Torah warns us beforehand. There are going to be individuals who will try to take you away from the Torah and tell you that there's a new religion, a new Torah, Chas v'shalom. Don't believe it. Don't accept it. They're false. And they may use magic, witchcraft, whatever you want to convince you. And you should know that this is always usually from an impure source, from the Tumah. So I believe that's the topic next week. Why did God create the impure forces, the impure powers? Which what they really do is thank you. They mislead us from the true path. Why does He allow them to exist? And they're called, the rabbis call them, why are they called keshafim shemakishim pamalya shel mala? It is through witchcraft which they appear to contradict the will and the desire of the Almighty. So they pose a big problem for us. So anyway, so we need to know what the source of everything is, and then we can proceed to either embrace it, to either accept it, or to participate, or to stay away from it. So this was all an introduction.